Fortunately, manuscript copies of it still exist, from which it is now published for the first time. Thus, 40 years after his premature death, Eric Liddell again speaks both to those who knew him personally and to the far larger number of us who did not. Herbert S. Long, Professor of Classics, Case Western Reserve University. I remember Eric Liddell. David J. Mitchell. If you saw the Academy Award-winning film Chariots of Fire, you will recall the jolt you felt as you read at the close these words about one of the heroes of the film. Eric Liddell, missionary, died in occupied China at the end of World War II. All of Scotland mourned. I remember seeing Eric Liddell just the day before he died. For more than 2 years of our wartime captivity, our school was interned in the same camp he was. The camp was Huaixin, Shantung, China. Our school was the Chifu School for Missionary Children run by the China Inland Mission, now Overseas Missionary Fellowship. That day he was walking slowly under the trees near the camp hospital, beside the open space where he had taught us children to play basketball and rounders. As usual, he had a smile for everyone, especially for us. The athlete who had refused to run on a Sunday in the 1924 Olympic Games in Paris, but who later won the gold medal and created a world record in the 400 metres, was now, 21 years later, at the age of 43, reaching the tape in his final race on Earth. We knew nothing of the pain he was hiding, and he knew nothing of the brain tumour that was to take his life the next evening, February the 21st, 1945. Eric Liddell's 20 years in China were eventful, to say the least. Within a year of his Olympic success, Eric had been farewelled from Edinburgh. More than 1,000 people were unable to get into the service. Deliberately walking away from the fame and glory that could have been his in Britain, he responded to God's call and went to China as a missionary with the London Missionary Society, following in his father's footsteps. For a number of years he taught science at the Anglo-Chinese College in Tientsin, and then decided to tackle the more arduous task of rural evangelism, travelling many miles in rugged conditions by foot and bicycle. On one occasion, as the hostilities between the Japanese and Chinese intensified in the late 30s, Eric Liddell heard about a wounded man who was dying in a derelict temple, and whom none of the local people dared help for fear of reprisals from the Japanese. Despite natural fear of the consequences should they be caught, Eric persuaded a workman to accompany him with his cart to rescue the wounded man. That night, in a tumble-down Chinese inn, as the two men rested on their journey, God encouraged Eric through Luke chapter 16, verse 10. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. When they reached the wounded man the next day, they lifted him onto the cart and began retracing their steps. Then, as they carefully led the swaying, creaking cart along the rough track, miraculously protected from encircling troops, they heard of another seriously injured man. The second man had been one of 6 who were suspected of underground resistance and who had been lined up for beheading. 5 knelt and were decapitated with a swift swish of the soldiers' swords. Because the 6th man refused to kneel, the sword missed its mark, inflicting, however, a deep gash from the back of the man's head to his mouth. He fell headlong and was left for dead. Villagers later came and helped him to a nearby shack. Though moving closer to danger, Eric and his companion reached the dying man, placed him in the shafts of the cart, and walked both desperately wounded men 18 miles further to the mission hospital. Not only did this second man live, but he became a follower of Jesus Christ. As conditions in China deteriorated in the weeks before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Eric Liddell arranged for his wife and 2 children to leave China, planning himself to follow some months later. Safely in Canada, Florence Liddell gave birth to their 3rd daughter, whom Eric never saw. Before he could get away, the Japanese armies had rounded up all enemy nationals for internment in Huaixin, in the province of Shandong, North China. Sent to the same camp in Huaixin in August 1943 with many other missionaries' children, I will forever share with all the other hero-worshippers of my age that vivid memory of the man whom other prisoners described excitedly as the Olympic gold medalist who wouldn't run on a Sunday. Eric Liddell stood out among the 1,800 people packed into our camp, which measured only 150 by 200 yards. He was in charge of the building where we younger children